Okay, should we crack on with our Friday panel? I like doing this on a Friday. We'll whip through some of the big stories of the week. Let's do that right now with Femi Oluwole, political commentator. Georgia Gilholy joins us as well, a journalist and contributor for Young Voices UK. Femi, hi.
Hi. How you doing?
I'm very well. Georgia, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
Oh, thank you guys for being with us. Always really appreciate it. Listen, I think we'll dive into the big story today. That is the personal finances of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, mainly his wife, really, and her non-dom status. In the last couple of hours, it's been announced that she will now pay UK tax. I think, as far as I'm aware from the status, I think she's going to retain her non-dom status, so she will still be a resident, technically, of India, I think, but she will pay tax, I think, in the United Kingdom in a way that perhaps she wasn't previously. So it's a little bit complicated, that, to be honest with you. And the other big story as well, of course, in the last couple of hours is a revelation that up until October of last year, Rishi Sunak had a US green card, effectively making him a US citizen, whilst being a member of Parliament in the United Kingdom, Chancellor of the Exchequer and various other roles within government. Georgia, by God, has it unravelled for Rishi Sunak in the last couple of days? What should we take from this, Georgia? I mean, has he sort of gone as far as making his role as Chancellor untenable?
Untenable, I'm not sure, because if you look at the rest of the cabinet and the Prime Minister himself, many of them have done things that people would have resigned for in previous governments, and they simply haven't. So true. I don't necessarily think this is the end of his time as Chancellor. I think in terms of this story, it'll probably blow over in the next few days. I think this kind of issue is something people care about. If you're the wife of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's ramping up taxes for working people, and you have a non-dom status that is allowing you to not pay UK tax, it doesn't even really matter what the technicalities are. It's bad optics. And I think you look from what's happened. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak was on the defence, saying people were trying to smear his wife, and now she's saying, okay, guys, I'm going to, rescind this status. So clearly she either thinks this looks bad or she realises that it is bad. So an error has clearly been made here.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of in itself, I suppose, an acknowledgement of an error. Femi, right, the green card thing I'm finding really interesting because, it is terrible optics. And when you look at it on paper, I mean, you think, well, somebody who's been a member of Parliament, whose job it is to act in the interest of the British people, to serve them as their Chancellor, holding US status, there could be arguably a bit of a conflict of interest there. It's not technically illegal. It's not technically against the rules. In fact, if anything, I think it's probably a bit of a slight on the United States that he's managed to have citizenship there but live in the United Kingdom and serve in the government over here. They've probably got more questions than we do at this point. What is wrong with that? I mean, is there anything wrong with that? I mean, it doesn't look very good, does it? But technically, I mean, is there something we should be worried about?
I think you're spot on with that, with the notion that the American authorities should have more questions to ask as to how he's managed to live here with a green card status, because he's supposed to have lived over there if he's got a green card. But I'd also say that with both the situation with his wife and with the green card, I think because we've gotten into this argument of, well, this is my personal life, why are you attacking my wife, and that sort of thing. And I think often that's because we're not really careful as to what the difference between like primary evidence and corroborating evidence. So the primary evidence as to whether or not Rishi Sunak is a decent guy, whether or not we should be trusting, whether or not he's the sort of rich toff who only cares about the elites and doesn't care about working class people. That's the fact that he's consistently voted to lower benefits, to against raising sickness pay. He's voted to defund local government. He's voted to withdraw powers from local governments and from Wales, from Scotland. He's a person who left 3 million people without wage support during the pandemic for over a year. That's the primary evidence. This stuff about the fact that he was willing to allow his family to benefit financially from a loophole in the tax situation, whereby his wife would be paying a 39% tax if she was domiciled here, but she's paying the 20% over there, so there's a missing 19% that she didn't pay, which she's now choosing to pay, but is willing to benefit from that. Again, it's flavoring to the fact that what we already know about what Rishi Sunak has done in terms of his actions in the Parliament. So I think that's what we need to be careful of here.
Okay, that's interesting. And Georgia, I mean, I guess the conflict of interest issue is really interesting, isn't it? Is as whether, having somebody who is a non-dom in his household makes it hard for him, because he's in charge of tax policy, right? And the idea of sort of effectively outlawing the ability to be a non-dom has been hot on the agenda. In fact, George Osborne, I think, at one point before it all fell apart for them, and that particular flavour of Tory government, committed to outlawing being a non-dom. Isn't it the case though? Couldn't you sort of argue that regardless of who's the occupant of number 11 Downing Street, I mean, if I was the Chancellor, I could, in theory, being in charge of tax policy, raise the tax threshold to a couple of quid before what I earn annually, right? So, I mean, regardless of who you are always at risk of a conflict of interest when you are the Chancellor. Is this any different?
I think in every way, humans are imperfect and we all have our own biases and conflicts of interest in our personal lives. I think, come on, if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer and you're in charge of the tax policies, basically, I think it is bad and it looks bad. And I think that especially, if you're married to an heiress billionaire and you're telling people who can't afford to pay their heating bill, okay, well, we all need to sort of, get in it together and go, handle the storm, blah, 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 in terms of sort of our economic problems. And then you're happy to benefit from loopholes in the tax system yourself. I think it is wrong and it looks wrong. And I think British people don't usually care about whether a politician's rich or who they're married to, but I think they do care about people not playing by the rules, and that is very much what this looks like.
It's been extraordinarily damaging for him, Femi, not just in the country, but in his own party as well. Is this, and there's some suggestions this weekend, as we head into the weekend, that this is an extremely effective, extremely well-timed briefing on behalf of somebody, I don't know, maybe somebody whose job feels threatened by the rise and rise of Rishi Sunak. What are you hearing, Femi? Is that a possibility?
I think that's definitely a possibility. I think, especially given the damage that's been done to Boris Johnson's reputation in relation to Partygate, but this seems to be Partygate seems to be the one thing that was cutting through to people and to voters, especially in the Red Wall. There was that risk of, well, who are they going to turn to? And often the only person people can really point to are people like Rishi Sunak, potentially Liz Truss. And so Boris Johnson's entire strategy has been, well, there's nobody else to go to. And so the stronger Rishi Sunak looks, the worse things get for him. So I think it is definitely in Boris Johnson's issue to bring up this sort of stuff.
It'd be truly extraordinary, that, wouldn't it, Georgia? I mean, do you buy that? Do you think that this is a briefing from somebody somewhere close to Boris Johnson?
I'm not quite sure about that. We do know, of course, that Number 10, as a Number 10 spokesperson, or I believe actually Boris Johnson himself denied that early today, but I mean, I think we know at this point we can't really trust the word that he says. I think it could be Boris Johnson. It could also be someone in the cabinet who maybe feels they're not getting enough funding for, say, levelling up. Michael Gove, for example. This is all obviously guesswork, but I think there's plenty of people who would be happy to release this information right now.
Yeah.
And not to mention, we've had this issue of when stuff is being drip-fed to us right at the right time for a fair while now. Partygate, all that stuff, they've known about that for about the better part of 2 years. We are getting drip-fed this information when it's convenient to the people who are behind the scenes.
Yeah, Rishi Sunak has spent a long time knowing he had a green card for the US, and presumably those people around him have known that as well.
Exactly.
Gareth in Derbyshire, welcome to the Friday panel, my friend. What are you thinking?
Good evening. Yeah, I mean, I think with Rishi Sunak, this is a case of what goes around comes around, because clearly the look is dreadful. And I think this is political naivety. But the truth is, it shows the reality of the way he looks, or his family look. Whether do they want to be Indian, British, American? Well, and today he was defending his wife and saying, don't bring my wife into it. But, recently, Boris Johnson had trouble with this Partygate with his wife, and Rishi Sunak wasn't front and centre defending him. He was sort of at the back of the...
He was in Dover at one point, wasn't he? He was on one of the big days. He'd escaped down to the south coast.
So I just think for him, this is a total disaster. He'll never be able to be, number 11 is the best he's going to get, because he'll never get into number 10.
But what you're saying, Gareth, is that you feel that he's brought it upon himself within government?
Well, I just think it's naive, and I just think it's... in terms of Conservative Party, it just looks really terrible, doesn't it? And, nobody would ever vote for him as a possible leader of Conservative Party. And truthfully, because they've come out today, and admitted it was a mistake. What have they been doing for the previous 5 years?
Gary, do you mind just the optics bit aside and the politics of it, and Rishi Sunak, number 10 getting their own back on number 11 for not being overly fulsome in their support during Partygate? Just park that for a second, Gareth. Do you have an issue with your Chancellor of the Exchequer having a wife who is a non-dom and him himself holding a US green card? Is that a problem for you as a British citizen? He is your Chancellor.
Well, I think it is because, the vast majority of people who vote Conservative are taxpayers, and a lot of them struggle to run the businesses and make sure that they put in the self-assessment and pay it. And he's trying to avoid it in some respect. Whether it's legal or illegal, I'm not sure. It's obviously a bad law.
Right.
But the fact is, it just doesn't look good.
Okay, no, it just sort of lends itself to that, the us and them, doesn't it? Gareth, nice to talk to you. Thank you for your call this evening. Really appreciate it. 0344 499 1000. Talk on your message to 87222 if you want to join in with Femi and Georgia. We've got a couple of other big stories to get to, including gambling adverts. This is a really interesting story, actually, because as of, I think it's October this year, so there's a couple of months for this to be implemented, sports stars and celebrities will no longer be allowed to appear in gambling adverts. And there are some rumblings in the industry and around regulators as well that we could, in fact, go as far as doing what we did with cigarettes, and that's banning their advertising altogether. We'll get to that. We'll talk about Channel 4 as well and the privatisation. It's sort of like, I think, pretty much on the same page, Femi and Georgia, so far. I feel like there may be a dividing line on the horizon. We'll get into that with our Friday panel and talk radio next. Stick about. Femi Oluwole is with us. He's a political commentator, and Georgia Gilholy, journalist and contributor with Young Voices UK tonight. Thank you both for being with us. Femi, you're right in what you say, aren't you? In as much as it's not politics versus what they do. It's the politics bit, right? And if you're going to raise taxes, if you're going to find money to fund the NHS, find it from a place that's reasonable. Question marks over the idea of raising national insurance at a time of tight squeeze for those who will feel that the hardest. Fine, but that's really about policy, isn't it, rather than the personal stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm using a lot of different metaphors here, but this is the dodging the tax avoiding. Let's be careful with my words there. Tax avoiding family and the US green card. It's not the wound, it's the salt. It's the thing that makes it even more painful that he's making these political decisions that are hurting people whilst himself living his own. I mean, we've heard this phrase like countless times throughout the past 12 months. It's one rule for them and a different rule for the rest of us. None of us will ever have the ability to just say, "Oh, let's just pay a fraction of the tax that we would otherwise pay." But it does happen for them. And as typical and expectable and predictable as you'd expect, I'm obviously going to bring Brexit into this because this is not the beginning of this story. The reason why this government is in power is because people, especially in those red roll areas, trusted this government on the basis that we feel that we've been left behind, we feel that we've been ignored, we feel that politicians don't genuinely care about us. And you people, the ones that promise Brexit, are the ones who genuinely care about us. You're going to actually divert resources to our parts of the country because you care and you really feel our pain. And everything we've seen from Partygate to the way they've handled the voting in terms of reducing benefits, lowering sick pay, leaving the North behind, giving the best grades from state schools to private schools, and the A-level algorithm scandal, and now this shows that they have never cared at all.
That's a really good point, a really good parallel to draw there, Femi. Okay, let's move on. We'll remind you in the interest of fairness that Rishi Sunak's wife, Kasia Mutti, has said that her spokesperson has said that she pays all tax that she is due in the United Kingdom. In a statement earlier on today, she apologised and said that she will increase her contribution to the UK coffers. Let's move on, because this is a really interesting story as well that caught my eye earlier on. Celebrities and sports stars are, from October this year, going to be banned from appearing in betting adverts, which is a really interesting, a really fascinating shift, hasn't there, in the last couple of years as to how we view the gambling industry and the potential harm that it does to society. Georgia, for a start, is this a good idea? Is this a reasonable, proportionate response, do you think, to the problem of gambling, to ban sports stars and celebrities from appearing in adverts and encouraging it?
I think it's interesting that this is the thing they choose to do, remove celebrities from the adverts. It's not something as restrictive as, say, banning the adverts. It's interesting why they chose to do that small thing. Maybe it's less hassle so far to just do that. Maybe that's why. I don't know if there's been studies, if people are more likely to gamble if, I don't know, Britney Spears is on the Foxy Bingo advert or something.
That'd be a coup and a half, wouldn't it, for Foxy Bingo? Blimey.
Maybe, yeah. I think, if anything, this isn't enough. I think that gambling is a very serious and damaging addiction, and I think that people who are involved in it obviously need very serious help. And I think, the fact that it takes 18 weeks or more for people to get mental health help on the NHS right now, it's far too long. How are people supposed to find the help they need with these conditions? And also, when it comes to an addiction like gambling, in my experience, coming into contact with people who may have those kind of addictions, and also studies, they may have an addictive personality that means that say they give up gambling, they might take up a certain type of drug or other kind of abuse to their health or whatever instead. So they obviously need some kind of bigger help. It's not just, oh, well, I didn't see, I don't know, someone from Coronation Street in a bingo advert, so I'm not going to do it anymore. It's obviously much deeper than that, and some people might get into it because they feel they can try and make money, they might be in a bad financial situation. There's so many different things to consider, and just doing something sort of token like this, I mean, it's typical of this government to do something like this, but it doesn't mean it's actually going to help people.
Okay, Femi, there is this sort of libertarian train of thought, isn't there? That people can make their own decisions. People are rational beings. People shouldn't be toddlerized and treated like children. If a gambling company wants to advertise with whoever they want to advertise with, they should be allowed to, and people should be allowed to decide whether or not they want to, off the back of that, gamble or not. Does that stand up in this case?
I think the reason why that doesn't stand up in this case is because research by Public Health England and published on the NHS website shows that 246,000 people are currently have gambling problems, with an extra 2.2 million who are at risk of developing gambling problems. So the notion that, well, everybody can just make up their own mind, that doesn't work, because clearly not everybody can. Clearly there are people who are susceptible to this kind of thing. And it reminds me of one time I was on holiday, and this guy who the hotel offered us to see for a discount, he basically tried to offer us a timeshare. And one of the ways he did it, by the way, this was a dodgy as hell thing. Like the hotel wouldn't actually banned us from Googling this person, so Google just wouldn't let you Google the thing. It was dodgy as hell.
Crikey.
And one of the ways he tried to hook us on this thing was by showing us his Subaru, his nice villa in the mountains, etc. If you see somebody who you see is doing really successful, that's going to be a really good influence or maybe actually get on board with this as well. And so having celebrities and footballers who have millions, who a little gambling addiction is not going to be a big deal for them. But if you are scraping by on universal credit and you see gambling as potentially a way to get out of that, that's a very dangerous level of influence that you're allowing to go on TV screens. So I think this is a good step, and as Georgia said, I don't think it's enough.
Okay, Georgia, how much further would you go then in the effort to try to limit the effects of gambling?
Maybe even ban it. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on this, but I think maybe it should even be banned. I don't know.
Gambling altogether?
Apart from in certain areas, maybe, kind of like in America, where they have certain areas where they can operate and people might go there, for a party or something. But in terms of, you see these sort of scummy websites advertising everywhere, and I think that's quite dangerous. Especially, you hear about people whose their kids are on their laptop or something, and they end up on a poker site using their parents' credit cards. Obviously, that's also their parents' fault for not keeping track. But I think a little bit of something like this, it's all in moderation, might be fun, on a night out or at a party, but maybe a stag do or whatever people do. But I think that in general, it clearly causes more harm than good.
Yeah. I must admit, so I'm a Bolton Wanderers fan, right? And when we don't do this so much anymore for reasons I'll explain, but me and my granddad, when we used to go to football, we'd put a quid on, a couple of quid on first goal scorer and final score was what we did. And there were small kiosks in the stadium where you could go and do that, little gambling kiosks. And our new owner, the new owner of the football club, a woman called Sharon Britton, it was quite big news this, so you might have seen this. She banned gambling kiosks at the stadium, and she cited the fact that she'd had a family history, she'd had a difficult marriage, and it seems that addiction to gambling was involved in that. And she took that decision, and I was sort of like trying to grapple with the fact that, well, you know, I was perfectly able to just, you know, fortunately, there but by the grace of God go I, perfectly able to just put a couple of quid on and you know, and enjoy the thrill of that couple of quid. I was kind of okay, actually, to not have that luxury, if it meant that somebody, the person in the seat next to me, who does have a profound problem with gambling, is cut off from his supply, the thing that could be potentially ruining his life. That felt like a relatively small sacrifice for me, and so maybe there's something in that. Listen, let's move on, because I want to, before we run out of time, get a conversation about Channel 4 in, which has been a big and interesting debate this week, hasn't it? I wonder if we may find a point of division on this one. You'll have seen, no doubt, at the start of this week that Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, announced plans to sell off Channel 4 to a private buyer. As it stands, Channel 4 has a public remit to make public programmes. It also is remitted to make programmes entirely produced by the independent media sector, so it supports a big, massive sector. It's also profitable, by the way, and has a bigger market share than Netflix, and it seems to be holding its own and doing something relatively decent for the public, in the public interest. Georgia, what on earth would you want to sell that off for?
I think it's interesting because it seems that Nadine Dorries possibly doesn't actually understand herself why she wants to sell it off. I think we saw late last year she seemed to think that it operated similarly to the BBC, where we obviously pay to have to use it, which is not the case with Channel 4. The public, the taxpayer doesn't fund Channel 4. It gets its money from ad revenue. I think it seems as if the government have cooked up this idea that this is going to help them in the so-called culture wars, because Channel 4 is obviously a bit more openly left-wing than, say, ITV or with the BBC. I think most people don't really care.
Is it openly left wing, or does it just because we have this really? Because I'm really fascinated by this at the moment, right? Because I'm sort of like, I'm trying to take a sort of an objective view on this, right? Sort of know where the media, the Daily Mail is right wing, the Guardian is left wing. We all know where some of those big properties sit. But Channel 4 is an ITN production, right? And I wonder if there's something actually, Georgia, in the fact that it has held the government to account. We have a right-wing government, and so holding the right-wing government to account can easily be misconstrued as being left-wing, and that's not really what it is. And it's sort of to a degree fallen victim to that.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't sort of be accusing Channel 4 of, I don't know, Bolshevism or something, but I think many of the people who have sort of gone through the ranks in there may have more of a progressive past than say someone on ITV. I'm not necessarily saying that's always a bad thing, and I think that them holding the government to account is obviously fair enough. I think as well, if you maybe look at some of their cultural stuff, it might be seen as more progressive. Though saying that, I really have not watched recent stuff on Channel 4. I've watched sort of a lot of the 2000 sitcoms, say like Peep Show, Green Wing, Friday Night Dinner, that kind of thing. But I think they seem to be sort of quite edgy when it comes to comedy. So maybe they're seen as a bit more progressive, and some of the journalists on the political stuff, and they do, an extraordinary range of documentaries, and they often, delve into sort of more controversial things. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea to sell them off. I think as well, if you're sitting as a minister, as Nadine Dorries is, if she had maybe a bit more about her, no offense, they think, okay, well, maybe we think that her own policy isn't as good. What can we do to fund, more educational programs, better quality dramas, comedy, if we feel that the quality isn't as good for us to keep it in the public interest? But they're not doing that. They need to just be selling it off because they can't be bothered with it, or they see it as, like you're saying, not necessarily super left wing.
It's holding them to account, Georgia, is what it's doing. It's being a massive inconvenience, and it's holding power to account is what it's doing. And we have a government who don't like being held to account. Femi, Nadine Dorries makes...
Well, we know that.
Yeah. Femi, we make this... Nadine Dorries makes this point about in the sort of really convoluted rationale that she's given for wanting to sell Channel 4 off. She talks about the streamers, about Netflix, about Channel 4 needing to be able to compete. Is there a point in that?
In what sense?
In as much as Channel 4, or her argument, I suppose, and I don't buy this for a second, personally, to be perfectly honest with you, but her argument would be that Channel 4 needs private investment in order for it to be able to match the sort of amount of money, I guess. I mean, I suppose it's this basic, the amount of money that Netflix and things alike are spending on their infrastructure, on their programming, in order for Channel 4 to continue to compete against them.
So I think it's a problem with the conservative view of how capitalism and how the market should work, and that the market should essentially dictate how these sorts of things work. But the thing is, often you hear that the Tories especially claim to be on the side of free thought and free market of thought. But you can either have a free market of media ownership or a free market of ideas. If you have a free market of media ownership, then essentially you end up getting monopolies, whereby you end up getting these big media moguls owning all the production, and that can end up restricting the amount of different ideas that come through. And so if you did get Channel 4 going in a much more privatized direction, it might end up with a much more limited range of the sort of content that it puts out. And that's my worry, because we are dealing with the same government that's, Nadine Dorries, we're dealing with a government that is consistently trying to stifle opposing views. And we saw that with, for example, Nadine Dorries. She once tweeted that the police should effectively arrest Steve Bray simply because he shouted in protest over Parliament. You had Steve Bray overtly saying that the reason why he wanted Paul Dacre, the former editor of the Daily Mail, to be in charge of Ofcom was so that they would be a bit more conservative in what gets reported. Those were his exact words. So we are dealing with a situation where this government will do what it can to make sure that the media that the British people see is much more skewed in their favour.
Okay, that's really interesting. And Georgia, I want to pick up on a little point you made, or a point you made about progressive programming, because I find this really, really interesting. And I wonder if we're making the wrong call here. That programming that is, for example, about the climate crisis. Channel 4 has dedicated a huge amount of programming to the climate crisis, or questions of racism, institutional corruption, all those things that are sort of holding power to account and are, I suppose, championing might be the wrong word, but at least promoting values that we should all hold dear. Their Back to Front series, for example, where for a day they had black broadcasters hosting some of their most prominent shows as a show of support. The fact of the matter is, black people are still underrepresented on the media. For all as we sort of shout about the division there, statistics tell us and the facts tell us that black people are still underrepresented on the media. I wonder if people are mistaking that, Georgia, and maybe this is the mistake that I'm calling it a mistake that you've made, in that those things aren't left-wing. They're just what a good, sensible, responsible broadcaster who's acting in the public interest should do.
I mean, I don't think that being anti-racist is a left-wing thing, and I don't think that being anti-racist is something that should be smeared, obviously.
But
I was trying to frame it as that's some people's criticism, but like I say, I'm actually not, I never watch Channel 4. Actually, I don't really watch television at all. So I'm not someone who could sort of comment on the overall approach, but that programme you just cited to me, I mean, that doesn't sound anti-right-wing or anti-left-wing. It just sort of sounds like an idea. The only thing, I mean, maybe I shouldn't be going on a ramble about this certain programme. To me, that actually seems maybe a bit tokenistic. Just, okay, for today we're going to put, some black people on these certain programmes, but tomorrow they won't be there, and this is going to help fight racism. To me, that actually maybe seems not very progressive.
I think it goes with the definition of left and right wing. As you said before, Darryl, that it might be perceived as being skewed to one side if you simply hold the government to account, and that is a very real risk. So for example, I use this token example would be Brexit. If objectively Brexit is 80% bad, if you present it as 50-50, that's objectively going to be seen as skewed by people on either side. And with the left versus right issue. If we're talking about the issue of racism, then left wing compared to where the conservatives are, I mean, they're the ones who the United Nations recently accused of seeking to normalize white supremacy. Left wing, i.e. just having fairness, is going to be, is the right thing to do. Because right wing on the issue of racism is racism. It is simply that. When you talk about economics, though, that's where you start to get a little bit more. But I don't think there's that much economic debate on Channel 4 in that sense. I don't think there's that much economic skew in that sense on Channel 4.
No, it's about social issues, isn't it? It's about social issues, and it's about cultural issues, and it's about things that are that are basically fundamental pillars of a decent society, being that you are anti-racist, you are pro-equality, and I mean, the green issue is really interesting as well, isn't it? Because we have a scientific community, an overwhelming amount of the scientific community telling us that we have a crisis on our hands with global warming. Channel 4 do a series highlighting that, and they are earmarked as being left wing, and I think this sort of conflating, Georgia, of things that are just issues that a decent, basic sort of civilized society and democracy should be tackling, are being conflated with things that are left wing, and they're being argued over as political points when they shouldn't be, really.
True, but I think there's always a potential to politicize things. So I couldn't sort of comment on individual programs like you're saying, one about climate change. I don't know. Maybe it could have been biased to the right. It could have been biased to the left. I'm not quite sure what sort of solutions that they were talking about.
Sure.
But yeah, I think obviously some of these issues, people can misinterpret them. Sometimes the people presenting them can misinterpret them. But the interesting thing is we were sort of talking about how, is Channel 4 right wing, is Channel 4 left wing? I think the government probably doesn't really care whether it's what sort of political philosophy it's espousing.
It's being held to account. It's being held to account is the problem, and they don't like that, do they? Listen, Georgia, we're out of time. I'm so sorry. It's a good point you've made, and we get it for sure. Georgia, Femi, thank you so much. Really nice to have you with us on Talk Radio tonight. News is next.